You are listening to a podcast from The Hindu.
I am Jacob Koshi.
And I'm Shobna Nair, and this is the
Rear View. Here we dive into the history of things, events, discoveries, and inventions.
We arrived by train at Stockholm, the capital city of Sweden, at 8 o'clock in the morning on the 9th December. The platform was crowded with people waiting to receive the guests. There were at least 10 cameras ready for exposure. In northern latitudes in winter, sunlight is a rare phenomenon, but days and nights are made equally bright by thousands of electric lights. Everybody who spoke to us expressed sorrow that it being winter, their country was not looking its best, but was dark and bleak, and that we should see it in spring, shining in sunshine. As their sun never rises high up in the skies, one can well understand their fondness for sunshine. But if they had enjoyed the Indian sun of April and May, I'm sure their partiality for the sun would get moderated. Owing to the low actinic value of electric light, they always use flashlight for taking photographs. The suddenness and attendant noise as of a cracker startled newcomers, but we soon got used to it. Not being white-skinned, we could not mix with the natives of the country without being recognized. Moreover, our multicolored Indian dress was making us conspicuous to every eye. That, Jacob, was Lady Raman's account of reaching Stockholm 2 days before her husband, Professor C.V. Raman, was to get Nobel Prize.
The first ever by a native Indian doing science in India, and still it remains the only Nobel Prize for physics that has actually been won by an Indian, and this was in 1930. There were all these recountings of how he met King Gustav of Stockholm, and Raman himself has his own recollections about the ceremony, and it was a very big deal. Many years on, decades on, there is still this great clamor within India as to has a science progressed enough. Of course, many Indians who have won, but all of those Indians they did their work abroad.
You know, Raman was so confident about winning 1930 Nobel Prize that he had booked his sea passage to Stockholm even before the announcement.
And that's how he made it in time into December, when the actual ceremony was.
And why is this important? Because the first Indian to ever win Nobel, Rabindranath Tagore, could not attend the ceremony because he could not book his book a seat on the ship in time. And this shows what Raman was made of. He was
always confident. I mean, he had
almost bordering to cocky.
Well, yeah, but that's how we trace his entire, if you go back to his origins, born in Tiruchirappalli, and, he was born to a fairly, a very well-educated, even by the standards of South India by that time. This was 1888.
Yes.
And
he was born on November 7th, 1888.
So he was born in a fairly, I would say, middle-class family, but a family that valued education and learning. I believe his father was a teacher, and
he later on went on to become a lecturer in mathematics and physics. Okay. So that perhaps explains Raman's future.
And he was fairly precocious even by normal standards.
Extremely.
he finished school at 14, I believe. I mean, he got admission into the Presidency College, not in Calcutta, but in Madras.
In Madras at 14.
And apparently, once upon a time, the Presidency College in Madras, had C.V. Raman, had Subramanya Chandrasekhar, his nephew, but also another Indian who went on to win the Nobel Prize, but
For the work done in US.
in Chicago, in the University of Chicago, world famous, the Chandrasekhar Limit in Stars, etc. But again, they was all alumni of Presidency College Madras, but apparently now it's no longer the institute that it used to be.
Okay, I am glad that you have filtered away
Because the Presidency
your
College
thoughts
in
and have
Calcutta,
read back.
is a well-known college, and Calcutta is where a lot of the action that surrounds Raman's life
And we shall come to that. Now, Raman graduated with a bachelor's degree at 16, topping his class and winning a gold medal in physics. Can you imagine what an insufferable guy he must have been?
That's pretty big. He's a Sheldon, I guess.
Yeah, but
The real Sheldon Cooper.
Sheldon Cooper is quite insufferable. His friends hang around with him only because they really genuinely.
But he also got high marks in English. That's what that's what his report cards, his teachers have marked out. I mean, he spoke great English. He was very fluent. I mean, very expressive in the language. So English and physics, he was a gold medalist. So
But he doesn't pursue either.
yes.
He, at the age of 19, he joined the Indian Finance Service as an assistant accountant general in Calcutta in 1907.
Because it was kind of a career progression. I mean, if you were very bright in school, you went for the top job, and that was either you joined the Indian Civil Services, the ICS, or you joined the Financial Services. He topped the exams of both, but I believe that, to join the ICS, you had to spend some time in England. And for some reason, at that point of time, he just refused to go to England, and so he opted for the financial services, and that's how he decided to become an accountant.
Yeah, can you imagine? From accounts to winning a Nobel Prize for physics. And he covers this journey pretty very fast, one must say, in terms of scientific world, because you make incremental progress in whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
For Raman, that was not the case. And how does he come to science? He was traveling one day.
So he was already in Calcutta.
He was in Calcutta. He had joined in Calcutta. While going to work by tram, one day, Raman saw the signboard of Indian Association for Cultivation of Science. And he just, out of impulsive, it was an impulsive step to do. He just jumped out of the tram and went to investigate this.
And he already, yes, he had won those gold medals, but there's one more interesting aspect of his early career is that he'd actually published a paper by the time he was 18, in one of the, in a peer-reviewed journal, in an English journal. And that was a fairly exceptional feat for an 18-year-old. So he had the inclination to, I guess, pursue physics deeply, but he just branched off. And I think probably it remained at the back of his mind. There's, this love for physics, but, it doesn't say whether he was disappointed that he was, he was set for a career in accounting. But I guess he just took it as matter of course. And then this serendipitous sighting at the IACS comes about.
And then exactly what you just said, this is exactly what Raman goes and tells the administration there, that I published paper at 18 and I am interested in pursuing science, and can I use the space to do experiments? And this space till then was just used mostly like an adda of people basically exchanging their views and talking about whatever new grounds have been broken in the scientific world across
and apparently
the globe.
It was a very dilapidated kind of place. It had some research equipment, but it was largely this dusty halls, and it was what they would describe a gentleman's club. You just, the Bhadraloks of Renaissance Calcutta would gather together and discuss.
Yeah, Jacob, what is always interesting about all these characters that we have spoken in the last so many episodes is that they had gone out of their way. Science has not come easy to them. It was in majority of the cases, whatever they were researching was not the primary thing that they were doing, which is the case with Raman also. He has a job to look after. So he would and he had a very punishing schedule, and we will fall back again on Lady Raman's account of it. So this is what her description is of her husband's routine. At 5:30 a.m., he goes to the association, returns at 9:45 a.m., bathes, gulps his food in haste, leaves for his office, invariably by taxi, to be on time for work. At 5 p.m., he goes directly to the association on his way back from office and comes home at 9:30 or 10 p.m. after spending the evening at the laboratories of association. So can you imagine doing this day in and day out?
And apparently all of Sunday was spent completely at the association.
Yeah, such a lovely thing. I think that was the secret sauce of their marriage. They never got to see each other.
I believe Lady Raman somewhere said that the real miracle was that they had two sons with this punishing schedule. So she called that the real miracle in their life.
Okay.
So he was, and apparently this turned out, his whole enthusiasm, this actually inspired, the kind of drab proceedings at the IACS, because as you said, it was more of a place where people just didn't really use for research, but he actively, I guess, dusted off
And
the
what
equipment.
was Raman doing at IACS? He was working on acoustics, studying the physics of musical instruments like veena and mridanga.
Absolutely.
Such a South Indian thing to do.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I mean, it was just a curiosity-led thing, and he had this exploration to into particularly the tabla, for instance. I mean, one of his abiding research questions was, why does a percussion instrument like the tabla sound melodious compared to other, percussion instruments like the drum, etc.? And he completely, through this, got into waves, like understanding, the harmonics that are present in waves when an instrument vibrations. So this whole idea of waves, and this is of course sound waves, but it was only a matter of time before this transferred to light waves.
Yes, and he once said the veena strings sing not just music, but the secrets of the universe. Anyhow, we'll come to that. Finally, in 1917, he takes a plunge. After a decade of keeping such a punishing schedule, he finally decides to quit his job at the finance department, and taking a significant pay cut, he decides to pursue his true calling. He joins as the Palit Professor of Physics
in the University of Calcutta.
in the University of Calcutta.
Such a bold decision. I mean,
Would you do it?
No way. Can you imagine? He went for a salary which is 1/5 of his current salary. I mean, it's like it's almost like a bureaucrat in one of the ministries is deciding that, I'm going to
Quitting.
quit this.
And maybe joining politics is pretty much like that. A lot of people do that.
But at least there's a little bit more of an assured salary in this as opposed to a political career then.
Exactly, where you are like literally bankrupt.
But in this case, he was, this was a time when it was actually difficult to have professorships in universities. I mean, the requisite funds were never available. And plus, he was on an assured career path. He would probably have
In fact, he was being sort of shortlisted for promotion.
Yeah, he would have
and
been a
something.
senior accountant general. But, he takes this call and chooses a life of taking a huge salary cut.
Yeah.
So, pretty impressive.
But I guess he was prescient enough, and there was a brighter future ahead.
So this was quite a challenging plunge that he had taken. And remember, there was nothing like a professional scientific career yet. In fact, even Raman is still just a BSc graduate over here. And to be a professor, it's taken for granted. You'd have to have a PhD, but he wasn't. There were only a couple of established scientists in India at that time. And primarily, in the Bengal circles, there was the J.C. Bose, Jagdish Chandra Bose, etc. And so it was not an established career, but he took to it with gusto, and he started to publish a lot more of his research findings that dealt with acoustics and, of instruments, sound waves. And fortunately for him, this was that in the world, this was a time of great ferment in the world of physics itself. Physics was the most happening field of science this time. There was quantum theory that was emerging. There were disputes about what is light really composed of? Is light a wave? Is light a particle? So in terms of timing, there are all these major issues that are burning. And because he had the fortune or the foresight to focus on problems like this, he was a teacher as well as a researcher at the University of Calcutta. And because he started getting a lot more publications, he started to attract a lot more students
and
who used to work in his labs.
And he also got invitations that turned out to be a fortunate turn in his life. In 1921, he took a trip to Europe as part of his official duties, and this journey was transformative. He met leading scientists like J.J. Thomson and Ernst Rutherford. Now, what is more important, however, is not his meeting with these big people. What is more important is his voyage, is his ship journey, and this is, I'm reading out now, part of his Nobel Prize speech.
Okay, before that, one more important thing he did. There's this lovely book by Somaditya Banerjee, The Making of Modern Physics in Kurnool, India. So he actually says that Raman developed, as in his words, an odd habit of wearing a headband. In South India, people normally did not wear such headbands. They were fairly more popular in Punjab or Rajasthan. Yes, we have the divans of, princely states like a C.P. Ramaswamy, with those headbands, but he was not really associated with. So there is no real reason why. But apparently, M.S. Swaminathan of, the Green Revolution fame, and he was actually one of Raman's contemporaries. And he said that when somebody asked Raman why he wore a turban, Raman replied, "Oh, if I do not wear one, my head will swell. You all praise me so much, and I need a turban to contain my ego."
Oh, so sweet of
Such a
him.
modest man.
Such a humble, modest man. What I see him wearing turban is that is his physical manifestation of, when you underline a sentence and make it bold.
He wanted to stand out, as he said. Yeah, he wanted him to look different, and he was always this guy who was short and frail, and the geek, the proverbial geek who's not physically imposing. So I guess
he wanted to add a few extra inches on his head. Anyhow, so okay, so you will find Raman as a, your views about, at least my views, I don't know about you, Jacob, my views about Raman are deeply, deeply conflicted, and we'll come to that. I mean, I understand. The more I read about him, I understand that he needs to be applauded for whatever he has done, and we'll come to that.
But let's go on to the voyage.
A voyage to Europe in the summer of 1921 gave me the first opportunity of observing the wonderful blue opalescence of the Mediterranean Sea. It seemed not unlikely that the phenomenon owed its origin to the scattering of sunlight by the molecules of the water. To test this explanation, it appeared desirable to ascertain the laws governing the diffusion of light in liquids, and experiments with this object were started immediately on my return to Calcutta in September 1921.
So that would be the origins of what led to his most famous discovery, the Raman effect.
Yes.
Or I guess that's how an Englishman or a Britisher would pronounce it, but maybe it's the Raman effect.
Jacob, you look at blue sky and water stretching to your eye can see up till the horizon. Maybe you'll think of a poem, or you'll at least feel poetic, even if you cannot produce a beautiful prose or something, which I doubt you can. But in case of Raman, he is looking at that and just thinking, why the hell is this water blue? What is
There is a huge history to that because it comes back to that old, very basic childlike kind of question: why is the sky blue?
blue?
So the answer to this, I mean, to the standard observation to that was by Lord Raleigh, who had basically said that the ocean's blue is just a reflection of the blue of the sky, because he described a phenomenon called Rayleigh scattering, as it was called. Basically, in water vapor or dust particles in the atmosphere, when light rays actually collide on these particles, they are like billiard balls. They are just thrown off in different directions, and certain wavelengths tend to spread more than others. And the blues, that's why blue keeps scattering the most, and which is why that is just merely reflected in the light. But on his voyage, he makes this observation that there were stretches in, for instance, in the Mediterranean. The blueness of the Mediterranean did not correspond with the blueness of the sky at that particular time. Yes. It was like, for instance, there were huge discrepancies. He also saw, and I'm sure this was a common observation, that he even passed through the Red Sea, and there too, there were different colors, that were apparent to him. Which is when he made this link that, probably it is not the blue, the water is not reflecting just the blueness in the sky, but there is probably, the water has particles, has stuff which actually is responsible for colors. And probably light has different mechanisms when, of spreading, of propagating, that were different from what, Raleigh said. Incidentally, even his nephew Chandrasekhar, who went on to win Nobel Prize much later, also had several of his insightful observations on a voyage on the sea.
Yeah. So it seems that we should all go for voyages. I think it does good for your career. Maybe use the hint, take a holiday.
Absolutely.
Anyhow, what exactly is Raman effect? If you can sort of explain in very simple language.
So, as you said, so now this is to cut a really long story short. There were a lot of experimentation to see how this, how this happens. So, what we normally observe is that, when there's a substance, you shine light on it, whatever frequency of the light is incident or falls on a particular substance, the same frequency is maintained when it is emitted. That was like the classical law. But through nearly 7 years of work, Raman and his, and K.S. Krishnan, one of perhaps his most famous student and research assistant, who later on then became, I believe, the first director of the National Physical Laboratory, not too far from where we are over here. So together, they actually did a whole range of experiments. And then they found out that light, when it is incident on certain particles, actually disperses in different frequencies. And these frequencies are completely due to the inherent material. I mean, different materials would scatter light in different frequencies. And much, much later on, you would actually, there's an entire field called Raman spectroscopy, through which, just if you wanted to find out mysterious substance, let's say that there's a new substance, you don't know what is its composition, you actually shine light on it in a way that, and basis its diffraction pattern of light, you can deduce what would be the chemical constituents of them. But all that, of course, came much later. But this was his particular insight that,
So it's like, what you're saying, it's like Raman provided the scientist or the scientific world with a new pair of glasses to see the invisible properties of the matter, right?
Yeah.
And so there, I mean, this was again, I mean, because again, the chance, not really chance, I'm sure he had tapped on to what was the popular field in physics that time, the properties of light. And then there was a whole other question of what caused this. I mean, because there was this huge debate going on whether light is a wave or light is a particle. And this emission spectra that you are seeing, can it be explained by quantum theory, which was just emerging? So it was good for Raman because it kind of, his observations helped support ideas that light was composed of particles and, you know, of its quantum nature. But it's a very long, complicated story about whether Raman really believed in the quantum nature of light at that particular point of time. But be that as it may, it actually helped bolster the general. It was a new effect that he had observed just a couple of years before. I mean, the Compton effect was by the scientist Compton, who basically showed how X-rays would diffract in this way. So this was the equivalent of the Compton effort in the visible light range. X-rays, of course, something that is not very visible in the human electromagnetic spectrum. What is visible to us, so to say. So it's because of light, its effects. This was like a hot field, and those were the days of effects, of people, Compton effect and Rayleigh effect, and and so to have a Raman effect was an absolute
huge, big. I'm sure he must have been feted by everybody. He had a back hope.
He was very confident. I mean, and there is this whole history of how he did these numerous experiments, and it's fascinating because apparently the entire apparatus that he used costed how much? About $500, just rupees 500. Yeah, even if adjusting for absolutely, it's absolute. And this is all made in the lab. They making all of this stuff, not just importing stuff from abroad. And it was a phenomenon, absolutely made in India, and just a matter of careful observations. And he was so confident. In fact, he actually told Krishnan, following the results of certain observations, that the Nobel Prize, this must lead to the Nobel Prize. He was sure that, because he already seemed to be targeting working that. And thankfully, in those years, he had traveled to Carnegie, Caltech, and he had also traveled to Cambridge University, or or Oxford or Cambridge, I'm not sure which one, and given lectures. He had made contacts with, the leading luminaries.
Networker. One must also acknowledge that
he had these contacts, and he maintained them.
So somebody has to, as the Nobel Prize, since US president is also after a Nobel Prize, and he can vouch for the fact that how difficult it is to get. Raman must have also found benefactors who would have nominated him for the prize.
In fact, his most famous nominee was Arthur Sommerfeld, a very well-known physicist. And Sommerfeld actually came to India on an invitation of Raman to lecture at the at the University of Calcutta. And there, he was very warmly received and all. He made a couple of trips to Agra and had the whole Indian experience. He was generally an Indophile, a very William Jonesy kind of, culture of ancient philosophical traditions, etc. And it was overall in the world, in the European world, it was considered novel that here is this scientist from the Occident, who is aligned to European ways of thinking about about investigating the nature of things, and which would be it shows a progress from the classical Indian modes of speculation, etc. So he had come in, and he was the first one to actually write to the Nobel committee on Raman's work. And later on, of course, the Nobel committee really sits in after multiple nominations. I believe he was nominated in 29 and 1930. And then he had famous guys like Niels Bohr, who actually seconded his work, literally like the number two quantum theorist and, of the time. So multiple and it's not just one person. So there was an entire network of people who saw this as a significant advance. And very importantly, Raman did another very wise thing. I mean, the moment he had his results in hand, he relayed his news via the Associated Press cables. Yeah.
Very smart.
Yeah.
The media placement also.
He was, because that time that, that culture had pervaded, and this is very different from a J.C. Bose or somebody, who would just give stuff away.
In fact, all of you should go back and listen to J.C. Bose episode, because you will understand the context of this conversation better on how J.C. Bose did not land a Nobel Prize because he did not do the additional groundwork that was required, which Raman did.
But here, Raman, but again, I mean, even both of these people, what is common was they absorbed what is called a scientific culture. That is, you publish first. And it really made a huge difference, because just 1 week later, apparently, there were a duo of Russian scientists who had similar observations to what the Raman effect did. So, but it's because Raman got his publication out first. And in fact, the scientific publication that came in Nature was after he had actually made out this AP press, thing. So because he had done it first, he had precedent. So he almost narrowly beat out. I mean, otherwise he would probably have been edged out by somebody else.
But Nobel Prize was definitely a big milestone in Raman's life. Raman went on to live till 1970. He died at the age of 82. And there was more controversies coming his way. I mean, so far, actually, his life has been nice because he was ambitious and he has sort of managed to reach goals that he had set for himself.
He's always been somebody who's kept himself away from the nationalist struggles that were happening. I mean, he was in Calcutta. There was a whole revolutionary movement that was
he was
brewing
in
over
Calcutta
there.
in 1907.
Yeah, just 2 years after the
after the partition of Calcutta. Calcutta was ablaze. There were the Calcutta courts were full of cases of sedition. I mean, it literally forced the British to take the capital out of Calcutta.
But he was, as a scientist, he thought he was above political considerations, and he was somebody who was just enthralled, I guess, by nature and uncovering its mechanisms.
But Jacob, let's come to now his life post Nobel Prize and how he himself gets transplanted out of Calcutta, where he had lived for 26 years, where he won all the
accolades
and sort of.
So because that's also happening at the IAS, Indian Association for the Cultivation of Sciences, where now Raman, as you had also described, it was this gentleman kind of club, but with Raman's entry into it, he sought to sort of professionalize the place. I mean, he established a more systematic research program, and the consequence of this was he started getting more and more people, particularly from South India. The Professor Krishnan, as we earlier mentioned, and several others.
Of his associates were from Tamil Nadu specifically,
and
the larger southern India, and of course the rumor mills or basically, you have to understand, a man like of Raman's acumen, who himself keeps a punishing schedule. He does not rest at all. And he hopes and he believes that everyone else should also follow his example. So it is very obvious that he would have rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And he was known to be very straightforward, bordering to on
Absolute
being
insensitive.
abrasive.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are several examples of his insensitiveness that we will discuss eventually. But this particular sort of behavior of surrounding himself with scientists from Tamil Nadu, or preferring, or I mean, the allegation against him was that he was preferring the South Indians
Yeah.
over and above.
Diminishing the general Badalot Bengali culture that was, that was so entrenched in the understanding of the scientific renaissance that was happening in India. So, in fact, one of his most famous detractors was Meghnad Saha, and equally one of the doyens of, of the early nationalistic science movement in India. And Saha was, of course, Bengali, but Saha was, somebody who was from a completely different socioeconomic milieu from Raman. Raman was Tamil, Brahmin, South Indian, and etc. And this guy was from one of the lower castes in the Bengali.
He was 5 years younger to the Raman, and he was born to Namashudra family, which is a lower caste group from rural Bengal, and he faced a significant socio-economic challenges and caste discrimination throughout his life. And unlike Raman's family, his family was of more humbler, or the means.
He was literally the kind of guy who had to study under street lights and
exactly, and
didn't know where his next meal came
from, and books and everything. So his rise to scientific prominence is actually a remarkable feat of resilience.
And he was also a revolutionary. I mean, he was somebody who was sucked into revolutionary movement, precisely because of all the happenings that were happening in Bengal at that time. And he was anti-British. I think he was part of agitations, and this actually had bearings on his career prospects. But he was also extremely intellectually bright. So Saha excelled spectacularly in the world of in physics, pretty much in the same lines as Raman. In fact, first translation to English of Albert Einstein's theory of relativity was undertaken by Saha and Satyendranath Bose, very good friends and contemporaries. He actually translated from the original German. So he had actually, he knew, he was fluent in German as well as English. So, this is in the 30s, Germany was like was the absolute pinnacle as far as scientific research, scientific communication is concerned. So it actually paid a lot to be able to be fluent in German.
Jacob, if I'm not wrong, nearly a decade before Raman wins his Nobel Prize, Saha had come up with his Saha ionization equation in the 1920. And this was an amazing feat because he had combined the ideas of quantum mechanics with statistical mechanics to explain the spectral classification of stars.
Yeah. So he actually absorbed, the emerging ideas of quantum and just ran with it, applied it to, stellar, to the stars. I mean, he too became a fellow of the Royal Society. So his credentials in science, in science were like unquestioned. But he had this other completely different side to it where, maybe because it was his involvement in politics or his own background, he actually took a very radically different approach from Raman. I mean, he did not want science for science sake and just being absorbed into the beauty of nature, or as Raman was, he was just Raman was essentially like those, as Newton once described, I was a mere child on the shores and, playing with pebbles that caught my fantasy. Raman was like this guy who was totally into, understanding nature and being obsessed by it, etc. This guy wanted to use science for nationalistic purposes, for the larger public good.
Applied science.
Applied science.
He
Science
wanted
for
science to make a difference to the person on the street.
yes.
and which is why I mean he was he was far more linked with, for instance, Jawaharlal Nehru and the leaders of the nationalist movement, Subhash Bose. I mean, together they had come up with this economic plan, this national plan for science.
Back in 1938, he persuaded Subhash Chandra Bose to create National Committee to plan scientifically and systematically the national reconstruction of India, because they were all expecting what happens when the British leave India. We need to be prepared for that. And that led to the National Planning Committee, which consisted of prominent political leaders and leading scientists, including Meghnad Saha. And they finished their work in 1949. It was finally dissolved, and by then they had produced 27 volumes of report outlining a comprehensive and integrated plan for an independent India's development.
It's because I guess this attitudinal difference, it was a matter of time that Raman and Saha actually clashed. So some of this was actually by pure politics. So, Saha did not get the Palit professorship that Raman had, but he had already given that up. But he thought that he would be next in line for that, but he never got that, because of which he ended up going to the University of Allahabad. And but it's the fortune of the University of Allahabad today. It still hosts one of the most respected outlets for theoretical physics. And he established an Academy of Sciences over there. But over there, he was very much interested in the political goings on, at the IACS. And there was already murmurings against Raman, of how he had completely just taken over, and
especially because Raman gets an offer from to become the first director of the Indian Institute of Science, which was funded essentially by the Tatas. And
till then a completely British run
institution. And before he left the city that he called home for 26 years, Calcutta, to go for Bangalore, he tried to fix his own deputy, Krishnan, to take his job, to take his place, which was not very acceptable to the Bhadralok, who were very angry on this one person dictating the terms.
And interesting, Saha actually was not born Bhadralok, but because of his scientific achievements, he had, transcended the caste barriers, etc. And Bengal actually offered that.
Not exactly. I mean, he did. We can go on arguing on Saha, because Saha actually worked a lot in establishing that how these social the caste barriers and its implications for science, and those also he had flagged during his career as a politician also later.
So which is why, what the larger point was that, he also managed to gain a lot of support within the other members of the IACS, and, actively making the case that Raman was having a pernicious influence, and, it was just being dominated from the south. So this whole Bengal versus South rift was actually had its genesis over here. And ultimately, as I said, it ended up with Raman taking directorship at the Indian Institute of Science, far away in Bangalore. And that time Bangalore was seen as, it was like a nice retirement home, or somebody, once you're away from active science. And there have been many instances when Saha actually thought that Raman would support his candidature. This is even after fighting with him, but Raman, being Raman, never really
he was quite vindictive.
They had really opposing views. And as we said, Raman was fundamentally apolitical. He was not the kind who would actually support protests, and he was the kind who would break demonstrations and go and do his teaching anyway. He was you would say, a favorite of the establishment class, and
irrespective of who or what was established.
And the headgear doesn't know service.
Yes. So anyhow, so this fight that begins in Calcutta goes on and on till the end of both of their lives, and it does eventually lead to Raman being kicked out of IIC.
Yes, but that was
IIMC.
primarily, I mean, there was a whole different range of, politics, because again, Raman being Raman was somebody who wanted things done exactly in his own way, and he often did not take kindly to, others proposing different modes of working or prioritizing certain sciences. But all of it ultimately led to him one day just deciding to have his own institute. And I believe it was the Maharaja of.
I mean, we'll come to that, Jacob. But the fact is that within 3 years after Raman's appointment, the Institute's council called an extraordinary review meeting in late 1936, and there was an organized revolt against Raman. He was kicked out. He was not he didn't get a polite exit. And there were reasons for that, as what I have been sort of waiting to talk about. Raman's extremely complicated self. If you guys have been listening to us regularly, you would remember from the episode on the Indian women scientists, the first Indian women scientists, how Kamala Soni had to sit on a dharna because Raman did not allow women in his lab.
Yes.
He felt that women were distractions and women would not do any serious work. It was only after Soni's protest that she was admitted in. There is another episode of one of the students in Raman's lab, Sunanda Bai, after publishing 10 papers, scientific papers, single authored scientific papers, before going for her postdoc, committing suicide. And though there is no direct evidence connecting it to Raman,
I mean, or academics.
but there were sort of, the speculations that perhaps the atmosphere was not wasn't geared up for women in
So he's been accused of having a very dictatorial style.
yeah. And very, very abrasive, very straightforward. I mean, straightforward, yes, but sort of insensitive manner.
And in fact, a quick callback to the Saha Raman thing. In fact, Saha was one of those guys who actively pointed out this fact that Raman's famous Raman scattering effect was actually just a mere variation of what is called the Smekal effect. And, he said this publicly in some conference. So,
in front of the person who nominated Raman for Summerfield.
So not very polite. And but they also, you have the IAC has it still publishes the journal Current Science. First was actually brought out by Raman, but on the other hand, Saha at Allahabad was also the publisher of a magazine called Science and Culture, in which he led and commissioned a lot of science articles for the popular, for the layman, So even in that, and these are two, Science and Culture doesn't exist today, but Current Science does. But these were two, and they formed their own academies in the South and North. So this actually led to a whole institutional culture where, the North versus South in terms of, scientific cultures within India was actually born because of the rivalries.
Long before we speak of the political divide between North and South, the scientific divide was already established.
With the classical things, where the Southerners or the Northerners were very abrasive, whereas
uncultured, uncouth,
and the Northerners thought that the Southerners weren't dynamic enough or, pushing for new things. Anyway. So even as he was having all of these political issues that were happening in ISC, having to resign, etc., he had already dreamed of an institute of his own. And in fact, the Maharaja of Mysore had given him a piece of land, about 11 acres, which is within Bangalore itself. And eventually
Where he built himself a beautiful bungalow.
not
Sorry.
the bank, an institute.
Before I sort of, because that was the detail that caught my eye.
That was also
really.
there. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a lovely place. I've been to that institute.
Yeah.
And the Raman Research Institute, in his vision, was to be this place which would be free from political interference of all kinds. He wanted it to establish it as as some kind of a temple of science, which is removed from all of this thing, and where people would be working towards the most creative research. And he put a lot of his own personal money into this.
Yeah.
By this time, he had actually amassed quite a lot of wealth. I mean, he had made investments in 2 successful companies. One which made those Petromax kind of lanterns, and one was a fertilizer company. I mean, and they paid him a lot of dividends. All of this money from here, though, he transferred it back into the
Science.
institute, into his particular institute. And of course, he ran that particular institute as his fiefdom. And in fact, the first director of the RRI after him was his son, who was a radio astronomer at in the United States. But before that, there is a whole thing about how Raman had designed this institute, the trees that he selected, that would grow, the kind of activities. I mean, a lot of his research activities still connected to better understanding the properties of light. And he just got into collecting a lot of diamonds.
Diamonds, yeah.
But that is for
he had more
light
diamonds.
scattering.
Yeah, he had more diamonds than a woman can ever dream of. Apparently, Raman had a collection of 600 diamonds of different kinds and origins.
600.
600! These were from various sources, and he used them all in his studies. He even gave them special names to them, and each of these diamonds had a story of its own.
In fact, there was this story about how he decided to, he got one of his associates, whether they wanted to build a device where they could keep going around Andhra Pradesh looking for reserves of precious metals and diamonds, and he thought that, and gold coins, etc. So which he thought would be useful to get funds to build his research institute. But they never ended up building it. But diamonds is, I mean, even today, the Raman Research Institute, which is now one of the foremost centers for quantum cryptography or quantum computing, etc. Diamonds are a very, very important tool that these scientists use because of its structure and how, in Raman's time, about how light would interact with it. So it is still a tool of research, and I guess he was somebody, those 600 diamonds over there would have initiated several research programs, which I believe continues until today. So it was in this very halcyon environment that he spent his last days. He was constantly a teacher, and he would speak to students, and he was always, as several of his biographers have described him, always in thrall of nature, and like this person who was obsessed with light and beauty and its interactions. And he used to speak to, he had he had gone to IIT Madras, and he's given several lectures on the importance of science, the values of science. But again, as eventually towards his last days, because he was so removed from the political structure of science, he was somebody who was really against students just going away abroad to do research. He thought that India should not be spending too much money on, let's say, the space programs or basically capital heavy things. He actually saw science in a very pure sense, that is understanding nature and exploring the mysteries of nature. And I guess that in one sense removed him away from the future stalwarts of science like Homi Bhabha and Bhatnagar of the CSIR, the whole establishment science.
If you go back to our episode on Homi Bhabha, there was an episode of him sparring with Raman briefly. Raman did not even spare Nehru of his sharp tongue. Towards the later part of his life, when the late Jawaharlal Nehru, the Prime Minister of India, admonished India's scientists and asked them to come out of their ivory towers in which they had confined themselves, Raman reacted in typically sharp manner and said, "The men who matter are those who sit in the ivory towers. They are the salt of the earth, and it is to them that humanity owes its existence and progress."
In fact, he said this, that technology must always follow science. His argument always has been, and which is the classic, the pure science research as they call it, is that, it is only curiosity that guides people to observe things, and you build instruments to be able to make better observations. And once you have those sophisticated instruments, that is what gives ideas to people to practically use them for commercial purposes. So ergo, it is a science that directs technology and should not be the other way. And this is actually a very dominant culture that, in fact, I would say, as somebody who's covered science for some time now, that even till 10, 15 years ago, this was a very dominant approach towards covering science. That is, they did not really, many scientists in several institutions did not deem it very polite to actively publicize their work. Though Raman was a great publicist of his work, but they did not really think about commercial applications, etc. Now there is a very different attitude towards science with its funding, etc. But that was Raman, the classical purist in his ivory tower.
And he passed away in the early hours of November 21, 1970. He was cremated in the grounds of Raman Research Institute.
And February 28th annually is still commemorated as National Science Day, not for his birth or death anniversary, but for his announcement through the Associated Press of the Raman effect. So that's how it lives on. So that was a interesting tour again of the life of one of perhaps India's most famous scientists. And keep listening to us for more.
Yes, thank you so much. It's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.